Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. We're joined again by Majid Jabrayilov. Hey, Majid, how you doing?
I'm fine. How about you?
Good. So much to talk about. SwiftUI is such a dense topic. I can't believe it's been a year since they introduced it. And we had Jason Anderson on talking about reactive functional programming and how radical this was. But it's been so welcomed by the community. I feel like it's a good indication of how much something like this has been desired for a while, because it's the same thing with like Swift, right? When Swift came out, it's like people like Objective-C. It's not horrible, but a lot of developers just found it quite janky, actually. And then when Swift came out, it was just so quickly adopted by folks and really, really liked. And I feel like that's the same way with SwiftUI. Were your like overall expectations met with this year's WWDC?
Yeah, actually, a lot of new things. Actually, all the gaps filled. I think all the gaps are filled, I think, but there's still some problems with navigation, but we'll cover it later.
Yeah. Well, we talked about navigation in the last episode. The one I wanted to talk about today is all the new property wrappers that we have now in SwiftUI. Of course, there's the main attribute, which we talked about in the last episode, but now we have things like state object and a few other ones. What could you kind of go over the new ones and how useful they are for developers?
Yeah, we have a few actually new property wrappers to manage data flow in SwiftUI. So we have big concerns about observed object. This is the old one, which we use to handle external data. So Apple give us state like and binding that we have to use when we want to use for view local states like animations, highlighting, filtering, stuff like that. And for data flow, actually, like your business logic, something that live on your backend or core data, we use observed object. But we have to manage its life cycle on our hands. So it means if you create the observed object inside a view, like during the view life cycle, you will lose all the data during the SwiftUI view updates. And Apple says that you have to manage it yourself, I mean life cycle, and you have to store it outside of SwiftUI framework, like in app delegate maybe, or in scene delegate.
So which property wrapper is this?
Observed object.
Okay.
This year, Apple released a state object. So state object allows us to use observable objects inside SwiftUI lifecycle. So SwiftUI will take care of it. It will create it and store it outside of the view, but it will survive all the view updates. So we was waiting for this property wrapper all the year because it was really hard to use observed object in some cases where you have just lost your data. So let me just give you more information about state object. State object, when you mark some observable object with at state object, SwiftUI will take care of it. So it will create it and handle it and store it in special framework memory outside of the view. So if you recreate your view, it does not lose all the data that you stored in your observable object. So usually we are going to use it for our view models that fetch some data from backend, or some stuff like should be alive during all the app life cycle. We can store it in the app protocol.
Okay. So what are some of the other property wrappers you'd use on an observable object? Like I'm a big user of environment object in a lot of my apps, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the best way to do it, but then at the same time, it is essentially like kind of used as a singleton, correct?
Yeah, I also use environment object a lot. I like the way that we can inject the observable objects into the view hierarchy.
Exactly, the viewer hierarchy, because it carries on
Yeah,
to all the children.
yes, yes. And we don't need to pass it to every child. If you have pretty big view hierarchy, it's really uh, creates a lot of boilerplate to pass it to every view. Yeah, this is actually the ways that I use to make dependency injection into some sort of feature or module of my app.
If you want your app to succeed, there's never been a better time to read up on App Store optimization. And AppFigures provides that just for you. As I've mentioned before, they have all these great articles and guides on App Store optimization, and you can check them out and help improve your ASO. Lately, they've also started doing teardowns of specific apps like Spotify, for instance, and show exactly how they're utilizing ASO to get the best possible download results. You could take a look at their resources page at appfigures.com/resources. You can also take a look at the link in our show notes below. Try AppFigures for free, and if you like it, use our special code EMPOWER3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months and increase your download numbers. Again, use our special code EMPOWER3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months. Thank you, AppFigures, for sponsoring our show. So we're talking a lot about these property wrappers and how we hook them up to different views using these observable objects. What are some patterns and practices that you've adopted over the last year to help you build your app and keep it maintainable and testable?
Yeah. So basically, I try to build my data flow as single state container because it eliminates a lot of bugs. Maybe similar, about Redux store, like very popular on the front end and JavaScript world. It's basically something similar. So you have all the state in one container and all the app derived from that state. When you changed anything there, all the app rebuild it. I mean, in terms of changed parts, and you have up to dated app every time. You don't have something that should be invalidated because of some part of the state invalidated. All the app is up to date to your latest state.
Yeah, I really like that. Like one of the things is just like the real challenge, honestly, and this is a talk I'm actually in blog post I'm working on. But like one of the things is being able to take like the older APIs and migrate those to one thing we haven't even mentioned yet, but like the elephant in the room with all this stuff is Combine, right? And being able to like create publishers from older APIs. That's a blog post I'm working on right now. And just being able to get those hooked up to your observable object, whatever that may be, and then updating your view is just, that's the easy part. It's the challenge is getting like your core location or your Bluetooth or whatever it is to actually work with Combine. And once you get that part, like it's not that hard to get your views updated easily.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I put all the state of my app into some store container, which is observable object, and I use it. I use at state object to hold it inside my app protocol. So this is something that is global for all my app. This is something that stores all the logic, all the state of my app, and I share it inside app protocol. Then I use, for example, I divide my app into the features or modules. For example, every tab of my tab bar is a different module, and every this view have environment object. This is where I divide my global store into some parts and share it between every tab. So one tab get, for example, part A, second tab get the part B, and third tab get part C. And all of them is passed by environment object.
So you use at state in your app protocol, it sounds like. Is that correct?
At state object, I mean new one.
Oh, the new one. Okay, got you. And then, so are you using environment object as well, or do you feel like you don't need to use environment object with a new API?
I use both of them because state object stores the global state of my app, and then I divide the global state into different parts and pass them via environment object.
Got you. Okay. Wow. Very cool. I'll definitely be checking that out because, yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of doing this. And this is with like the main attribute, correct?
Yes. So I wrote actually a series of posts about that approach that I think we can share it.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be putting that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about like storing the state of your app. How does this work with some of the new stuff with app storage and scene storage?
Yeah. So actually, there is also new property wrappers like app storage and scene storage, also scaled metric that SwiftUI gave us. But yeah, I actually have my own implementation of app storage because it's really crucial to have property wrapper like that to store your data in user defaults. Yeah, so app storage actually the property wrapper that allows you to store something in user defaults. It works very well for your settings screen, for example, when you have some toggles to store, for settings.
So is this like I've seen like the boilerplate code, and maybe you've had this in your blog, where there's a user defaults property wrapper. Is it similar to that essentially, but just specifically for app storage?
Yeah, actually, this is same as property wrappers that reads the data from user defaults, but there
Yeah.
is another great addition to this app storage property wrapper. It conforms to dynamic property protocol,
Okay.
which is introduced by SwiftUI, and it means that this property wrapper can update the view when the content of this property wrapper changed. For example, if you have a setting screen that uses app storage, for example, for toggle some booleans anywhere in the app where you also use that app storage, as soon as you change the values in your setting screen, SwiftUI will recreate the views that uses this app storage property wrapper to update your views.
Okay. Very cool. So how's that different from scene storage then?
Yeah, so app storage and scene storage is pretty similar property wrappers, but the app storage store the data inside user defaults. Scene storage handle the data inside per scene storage. So this per scene storage created by the system, controlled by the system, and every scene have its own memory called scene storage. So it's pretty good to use stuff like tab selection or maybe a selected index of the current book in your reading app, stuff like that. That's not so crucial to store in your database, but it's okay to store and restore it before scene destroy, stuff like that. So this is basically, we use scene storage for state restoration in scenes.
So, but it's only temporarily, right? If it's only stored in memory. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And now scenes are specifically tied to like the idea of if you have like multiple windows in an app. Is that correct? Okay. I still haven't wrapped my head. It's been a year. I haven't wrapped my head around scenes because I don't have to, because I don't build anything that's multi-window yet. So, but speaking of which, one thing I wanted to talk about, I know you don't do a lot of Mac dev, but the now supports SwiftUI with document-based apps, which is pretty awesome. I want to really dabble into that with my app, Speculate, where you can build icons out of SVG files. I'm starting to look at building an actual UI for it on the Mac. I think we talked about before the show, I'm trying to like build a replica of the iPhone home screen in SwiftUI. We're using grids. Now we got these brand new grids, and I'm really happy about that because like NS document is like, I never was able to wrap my head around it. And it's nice to see that being migrated over to SwiftUI, which is fantastic.
Yeah. We have new document groups in which works also on iOS. So we can.
Right, iPad, of course. Yes.
Yeah, iPad, iOS, and macOS. It works everywhere. So you can give you a predefined flow to open, save documents on your disk, on your iCloud, or in terms of Mac, the local stuff. Yeah, it's have a lot of logic for window managing that you don't need to handle you on your own.
What have you thought about the improvements to Xcode, like the SwiftUI previews in Xcode 12? Do you feel like they've been big improvements, small improvements? What have you found as far as previews are concerned?
Yeah, so actually, Xcode previews is one of my favorite features of Xcode.
Or my favorite feature of SwiftUI.
Yeah. But you can use Xcode previews with UIKit also. You can wrap the UI view controllers into SwiftUI and use them to preview controllers also.
Oh, nice. I didn't realize
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I use them a lot. I actually, previews just replaced the simulator for me. I don't use simulator too much as before. I just take a look at everything in my previews. I try to model, to structure my views, to fit the mock data, and take a look at it in previews. Yeah, I'm really happy to see that this year we can also build complications in Xcode previews, and we can
Wow.
also take a look at widgets in the previews. So you don't need to run it on your device or the simulator.
Yeah, I dabbled a bit into like today extensions, and it always felt like just a pain in the neck to have to like test and build and stuff like that. And like I'm really happy to see how widgets are going to work now that they're completely SwiftUI based. It's going to be a lot easier. So SwiftUI is not perfect.
Yeah.
Big surprise. There are a few bugs when you are developing an app in SwiftUI. What are some of the bugs that you've run into and some of the workarounds you've found in order to get around them?
Yeah, there are a bunch of bugs that it's really not documented very well. And fixes is really looks like a magic. Yeah. So first of all, it's text component, text view, that sometimes it's multi-line. It's hard to render multi-line text, just not working. Yeah, and you have to add a fixed size modifier to it. So at the first time when I saw it, it was like a magic, because I didn't understand how the fixed size works and how it allows the text to be multi-line, because there is a special modifier on the text that line limit, and you can give it nil, and it should be multi-lined every time when you have real long text. But it doesn't work as easy as it sounds. Yeah, and sometimes you have to add stuff like fixed size or layout priority.
Are you putting this stuff inside like a geometry reader in order to keep it dynamic, or you're just setting the fixed size?
Oh no. Yeah, you have actually you can fix the issue only by adding fixed size modifier. It should work.
Oh, got you. Oh, I know what you mean with the empty parameter. Yeah. Have you played around with the new text editor at all?
I just tried to build a document-based app for iOS that uh, is Markdown editor. I played a little bit with it, and it's not so powerful like UI text view in UIKit. But I felt some feedbacks to Apple about the text editor, that we have to use something like NS attributed string to colorize.
Yeah, right. I've run into a few situations where I've used I think it was a UI text view and wrapped it in SwiftUI, because of the fact that like I was getting rich text that I needed to display in SwiftUI, and I had to use NS attribute string. There's just no way to get around it. And like luckily we do have some stuff with UI view representable and UI view controller representable and things like that. So like there is a lot of they created a decent bridge, I guess, between some of the old stuff and the new stuff last year. So it's not a big burden, but still there are some issues.
Yeah, but I believe that text we will gain more power over text editor. I try to fill as much feedbacks as I can to make it possible to use native SwiftUI without representable types.
Right. Yeah. So like as far as the text editor, it's completely unformatted, right? Like you can't do any sort of formatting whatsoever.
Yeah, it is like text filled right now. just multi-line text field without any formatting and
Yeah,
stuff like
or text area in HTML. Like you really
that.
like unless you bring in a JavaScript library, you're pretty much limited to what you can do. Any other bugs you wanted to mention in SwiftUI?
In the first version, we actually have some problems with the list when you have a really huge list with thousands of items, and the diffing process was take maybe 15 minutes when you change
Wow.
the data, and animations doesn't work there. Yeah, so most of them is fixed right now. Uh, in the current version of SwiftUI, most of these bugs is fixed, and we can actually uh, turn on or turn off the default animation of list by adding or removing animation modifier to the list. In the previous version, it doesn't affect any behaviors in the component.
You recently had a blog post about the animatable values in SwiftUI, right?
Yeah.
What are some pitfalls or what are some things that you think people should be taking advantage of when it comes to creating animations or overusing animations in SwiftUI?
I believe that animations is one of the powerful things in SwiftUI. So you don't need to do anything. Yeah, it's really complicated to handle all the animations in UIKit, because in SwiftUI you have to just have the sum data, then change data, and add the animation modifier. SwiftUI will take all the responsibility to manage your animation and understand how the data change and which values should be animated. It works like a magic.
Yeah, it is pretty awesome to see it when it is working. I'll definitely be linking to your blog post on that because I think it's something people should definitely check out. Was there anything? So it sounds like you can disable animations. Anything else new this year as far as animations are concerned?
Yeah, we also have the match geometry modifier on SwiftUI that allows us to easily create hero animations in SwiftUI. I mean, when the one view transform into another by using animations.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and you don't need to do anything for it. You just mark one view with ID and mark another view with the same ID, and SwiftUI will take care of all the transformation from one view to another.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to let you know about this year's 360 iDev. It's running this year from August 16th to the 19th. I spoke last year at this conference, and I'll be speaking again. And it has a great collection of speakers. Folks you probably know from the show, like Joe Chaplinsky, Steve Lipton, Ariel Michelli, and more. 360 iDev is the premier iOS, Mac, Swift developer conference. Not only does it have a great collection of speakers, but it's a great opportunity to meet some folks online who you can connect with. For listeners of the show, you can get 20% off by using the promo code We Are Swift. Again, simply go to 360 iDev and use the promo code We Are Swift to get 20% off. This is a fantastic conference with a great collection of speakers and topics. I highly recommend you check this out. So one of the biggest views in SwiftUI are lists and for each. What are some features or bugs that people might run into or should be taking advantage of when it comes to those views?
Yeah, so list. Yeah, in the first version of SwiftUI, list was one of the buggiest view in the framework, and there are a lot of problems in terms of different type of views. When you use different type of views in the list, a lot of problems with the diffing animation when you have thousands of views in the list. But yeah, most of them are fixed right now. I'm checking all the bugs and feedbacks that I sent to Apple, and I'm really happy to see that a lot of them is fixed now. Yeah, but there is also one thing that we talk about, that list. Now we can control the animation. We can turn on or turn off the animation in the list. Yeah, but we can't control the type of animation in the list right now. So
Okay.
you can change the default animation to spring, for example, or linear animation. We can't control it at all. I'm not sure why.
Do you think it's purposeful? Like Apple wants to make sure there's a consistent like design to apps, maybe? I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of.
I think so. We can disable or turn on the animation by using animation modifier. In all other views, we can change the type of animation, but this it is not working for list. I think it's not consistent. Apple should make it consistent, and we can control the animation of the list. At least I hope so. So that's why I filled in as a feedback to Apple to see what's going on there under the hood.
How many feedbacks have you filled out? Can you tell?
About 60.
Oh my God. Good for you. Speaking of bugs, how have you been dealing with like errors that happen throughout the app? We had a really great episode with Jeff a couple of months ago talking about dealing with errors like networking errors, things like that. How do you deal with that in your SwiftUI view? Are you just displaying an error message, pop-up, sheet? How are you handling those?
Yeah, that's pretty great question, because error for me is another piece of data, like my state of like an array of some properties on some entities. Error is the same for me, so I try to render errors as useful piece of data, like using sheets maybe on some alerts if I can retry it. So it's nothing. It's not something special for me, like some unrecoverable state. I try to use them as just another piece of data.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think new folks don't realize, especially when it comes to Combine, is there is a difference between an error within a publisher and an error result. And once you get over that and being able to realize that, you can have a result that's an error, but not necessarily something that is going to break your app. And it's important to like make that distinguishing feature, because then like what I've done, I think in a lot of cases, what I end up doing is just having like some sort of Z stack where I'll display like the error on top, just like a friendly user error, so that they know, hey, we couldn't get a hold of this website, or we couldn't call this API call because your networking sucks or whatever. And like putting that on top and giving that higher priority, and then like having the actual result in a like a list underneath or something like that.
Yeah, I actually built an extension operator for Combine Publisher to transform my chain into the result where it has the value. Yeah, because it's error also a very valuable piece of data.
So one of the things I think a lot of people are concerned about is being able to test your apps. What are some ways that you've found to do like unit testing or UI testing with your Swift UI views? Like I have not figured out the best way to do like even unit testing with my Swift UI view. What have you found any workarounds for that, or how do you go about doing it?
So as I mentioned before, the architecture of my app is actually the state of my app living outside in some store, and I can easily test that store because it holds the struct, it holds the state, and I can easily assert them. And all the logic I don't have any logic in the views. All the logic lives also in the store, like pure functions, which just manipulate that state. It has input and output. That's it. That's why it's really easy for me to unit test my reducer functions that change the states, and I can easily assert the output. So this is in terms of unit testing of model layer. It's pretty easy. In terms of UI testing, I use the same way that I use in UIKit. It's XCTest framework. Yeah, I know it doesn't fit very well in declarative way of building apps in SwiftUI, but this is what we have right now, and I believe that Apple works on something very similar to SwiftUI and all the SwiftUI world that we can use to test our views. Because views, as Apple said, just plain structs, and it should be very easy to div them or assort them.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing pretty much the same thing when it comes to unit testing that I've been doing, where I like move all of my logic outside of SwiftUI. I just like there's nothing to really unit test on a SwiftUI view once you've moved logic outside of it. And like I'm not going to unit test SwiftUI itself. If it works, right? So yeah, it
Yeah,
seems like you're on the same page with what I've been doing. So you do have issues with like the UI testing in SwiftUI, it sounds like.
yeah, it works pretty same way as we have in UIKit. So it's all baked by accessibility framework.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's okay. I usually try to follow all the best practices and to my app to work with voiceover
Okay.
and to support all the accessibility features. So it's pretty easy for me to also write UI tests because I already have all the accessibility identifiers and all the buttons have proper traits. So it's okay.
So
I don't think that a really big gap in testing, right? Because you have to move your logic outside of the views, and then you can do proper unit testing. For UI testing, you have XC framework. Yeah, XC test framework is doesn't fit very well with UI world, but I believe that this is something that Apple works right now.
yeah, I can't imagine. There was a lot of good stuff actually on testing this year that I was impressed with. It's nice to see that testing is more and more in their wheelhouse, and more of a concern that they have, and like continuous integration, all that stuff. So I'm really happy to see that. So as far as testing, the only other thing I can think of is the new stuff with StoreKit, right?
Yeah. So there is a new actual framework, StoreKit testing framework that allows us to easily test our purchases, subscriptions locally without any sandboxing the app or stuff like that. There is also the manager that shows all the subscriptions inside the Xcode because really subscriptions and testing subscriptions and in-app purchases is really a nightmare for iOS developers right now.
That's what I've heard too. Yeah, you are your apps all subscription based, I guess, and you store in app purchases and things like that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I can only imagine. I'm sorry to look to that as well, and it sounds like there's been some big improvements to StoreKit, which is awesome. So I'm glad to see that that's been added this year. So before we close out, I wanted to ask if you have an older app, a legacy app, works on like iOS 12, how would you slowly introduce SwiftUI into an older app like that?
Yeah, very nice question. Actually, I have a few UIKit apps that I'm try to add some SwiftUI code. So basically, I start with the settings screen because SwiftUI provides us form view, which is one of my favorite features about SwiftUI that allows us to easily build complex forms like setting screen or some order screen, stuff like that. I usually start by re-implementing my setting screen with SwiftUI's form component. This is the first step, I think.
And then do you use like preprocessor directives, or how do you get around it so you can support older OSs? Or do you just cut off those older OSs at some point?
Yeah, I'm trying to cut off the older OSs because I think it doesn't work to support SwiftUI when you have somebody that use your app on iOS 11 or 12 because you have to make same work two times, right? I'm not sure that I'm going to create the setting screen one time in SwiftUI and second time in the UI
Right,
kit
right.
just to use SwiftUI.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When do you think would be a good time to like just completely, like if you're an older business, when's a good time to maybe completely abandon UI kit essentially and start going all in onto SwiftUI then? Do you think it's going to be a couple more years before we can do that?
Yeah, I hope that it will be possible in 2 years.
Yeah.
So for sure, it will be possible in 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but actually, most of that will try to build SwiftUI completely. I think starting next year.
Okay. And then are there ways perhaps you can like introduce new features using SwiftUI and like just say, hey, if you're an iOS 12 or older, you're not going to get that feature because your phone is too old. I mean, that's a possibility too, I guess, is just to exclude certain things in the older devices using SwiftUI.
Yeah, I think actually that's okay to make. For example, my old my Nabot app uses the iOS 14 and old version of SwiftUI, but I'm going to update it this year to iOS 14 and bring all the new features. But still, my users will be able to use old version, or if they update the iOS, they can just download new one.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. And then you're using on your older UI kit apps, do you just use like a UI hosting controller essentially, and that's the way you hook up? Or do you use UI view representable and go the other route?
Yeah, actually, there is only way to use UI hosting controller if you want to integrate SwiftUI into your UI kit app. So there is the only one way to go with UI hosting controller.
And then UI view representable is more about like being able to use your old UI kit views inside SwiftUI, right?
Yes, exactly. So you can use UI view representable to, for example, to wrap your map kit map view and use it inside SwiftUI.
We now have a map view, right, in SwiftUI though.
Yeah, this year we have.
It seems like they moved a lot of those older UI kit stuff over to SwiftUI this year, which is awesome. So, yeah, I mean, if you're restricted by that, then yeah, UI view definitely seems like the way to go for some of those older stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that Apple add SwiftUI views into all of the frameworks, because I see that AVKit provides AV player view, MapKit provides map view, same for Scene and Sprite Kit also. So SwiftUI is totally, I think, is a way of the future development of UI on Apple platforms.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Majid, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we could finally do this and really deep dive into SwiftUI. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was
Where can people find you online?
Actually, you can find me on my blog, so swiftwithmajid.com. You can also follow and subscribe the SwiftUI weekly newsletter that I am create and deliver every Monday.
Yeah, and we'll have links to those in the show notes. Again, thank you so much.
Thanks.
People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion. My company is BrightDigit, brightdigit.com, or at BrightDigit on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and we look forward to talking to you again.